Good morning, everybody. I'm Tarun Khanna, Director of the Mittal Institute and Professor at HBS. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this day of our annual Mittal Institute Symposium. This year we are centered on science and technology. Some of you would have been here to a packed room yesterday when Professor Diana Eck gave an encyclopedic tour of her 50 years of teaching about India. Just a riveting start. Now, that's not about science and technology, but it just seemed a fitting moment to honor somebody who had really, in a sense, been one of the foundations of the study of India at Harvard anyway. But today we have a super day, really, for me, a science and math aficionado, all about healthcare, medicine, AI, genomics, public health, etc. And I'm just excited for it. So we are supposed to go to 9:45. We're already 10 minutes behind. I propose we go to 9:50. So we'll have a short break before the next panel kicks in. I'm not going to say much. There is these schedules all around. This will be followed by a panel on genetics and medicine. There's a lovely exhibit outside put together by one of our faculty members, such as Balsari, working with SEBA on basically as part of our climate adaptation platform, a panel on climate change in the afternoon, something on global health and medicine, and then our annual Mahindra lecture, which is somebody distinguished from India who has contributed to public life and understanding of public life in the broadest possible sense. And this year, my good friend Soumya Swaminathan, who was the chief scientist of WHO until recently, has flown in just for the day to give the talk and go right back. So we're grateful for that. Okay. We have three amazing panelists whose bios are copiously spelled out. I'll just say very quickly who they are in the order that we're going to go. Dr. Manish Gupta is the director of Google Research India and the Infosys Foundation professor at IIT Bangalore, works a lot on AI and machine intelligence. And I thought we'd kick off with Manish, who will give us an overview from Google Research perspective of the state of play with research in India. Thank you, Manish. And then we have Ravi, Professor Ravindran, who is a professor at what would have been my alma mater had I stayed there. But Ravi is known for his foundational work on I think on convolutional neural networks. I can't remember exactly, not quite. Okay, you correct me momentarily. But I know him more for his theory work. But Milind was telling me that he's meandered into applications, to my regret. But even so, be that as it may, he'll give us that flavor. And he's also an advisor to the government of India for AI policy, which I think would be an interesting angle, Ravi, for you to touch upon, please, in a few minutes. And then my good friend here, Milind, who is overwhelmed with commitments that Harvard has imposed on him, but has been dragged here by us, nonetheless. And he works on AI for social good. So we'll go in that order. So Manish, if you don't mind kicking us off, and we a few minutes each, 5-7 minutes of overview, and then we can have a conversation amongst ourselves. Say 7 minutes, yeah.
Sure. So thanks, Tarun. I'll just use also a few slides. So I mean, just to set the stage, when we look at again AI, it really has that potential to impact pretty much the entire humanity at large. But what we see is a pretty significant gap between the capabilities of AI models in, for instance, languages like English relative to languages that are spoken by kind of billions of people, right, in the rest of the world. If we look at a country like India, again, there are only about 10 to 11% people who are comfortable with English. There are maybe some more who would understand, but in terms of preference, right, most people would prefer to communicate with let's say an automated system, right, in their own native language, or consume information in their own native language. So we've been kind of at Google Research India doing a fair amount of work in what I would say call inclusive AI, and let me kind of share some of that work of trying to develop AI in a manner that brings the benefits to, again, everyone, including billions of people who have previously been untouched by AI. So let me very briefly talk about maybe two aspects of inclusive AI first, kind of the work that we are doing in to make these AI models support languages beyond English. Uh, Another aspect is efficiency of these large language models, because it is well known that these models are often like of the order of several, sometimes of the order of 1,000 times or several orders of magnitude more expensive to run than the conventional AI models that we've been using, for instance, in things like Google search. And then, of course, there are opportunities to apply AI to, again, areas like agriculture that have not received as much attention. And again, there's a potential for transformative impact on those areas. So if I start with, let's say, our work on languages, uh, at Google Research India, we built this about 3 years ago. We built this model called Mural, which at that time provided the largest coverage of Indian languages, about 16 Indian languages and English. And it and for a variety of kind of natural language processing tasks, ranging from kind of sentiment analysis to question answering and so on, we saw that it led to significant improvements in the accuracy of the model on those tasks. And in fact, the improvements were much more significant on transliterated text. Let's say when you were really meant to communicate a sentence in Hindi, but you were writing it in Roman script. So we made that model freely available on TensorFlow Hub and Hugging Face, and also integrated it in various Google products like the Assistant. And now, as a result of this model, and these are some examples of, in Marathi, Bengali, and Gujarati, if let's say a person is conveying that I want to set an alarm in various ways, kind of in very free form kind of a language, the system is able to understand the user intent and generate a call to this function to create an alarm with the appropriate date and time set. So I challenged our team to actually start supporting not just 16, but at least all of the 22 scheduled languages of India. And I was very happy to see my colleague Partha Talukdar ignore what I just said to him. He came back and said, "Look, you're not being ambitious enough, because there are something like 60 Indian languages which have over 1 million speakers, and there are 125 languages which have over 100,000 speakers each." So he said, "Look, I'm going to build a model that understands all of those 125 languages, because if a language is spoken by at least 100,000 speakers, we want our model to understand all of those." So this is kind of easier said than done, because 72 out of these 125 languages are zero corpus languages, which means there is zero known data, digital data on those languages. So one of the things we began is kind of a joint project with Indian Institute of Science, Project Vani, where we started collecting speech data from different parts of India. And we have been making all of that data openly available. And our goal is, over the kind of next two phases, we have completed phase one, we are in the middle of phase two. By the end of phase three, we plan to collect data from each and every one of those 773 districts of India. And once we do that and we build these kind of India specific model, one of the questions is, how do you integrate them with kind of the standard LLMs that, for instance, Google has been building? And for that, our team has come up with a methodology called CALM, which in fact is being presented at the ICLR conference next week, which gives us a way of automatically composing two different language models together. So what you can do is you can compose your India-specific models directly with, let's say, an LLM that Google would have built, like Gemini model, and get the best of both worlds. The overall kind of world knowledge and all of the superior kind of capabilities of the base Gemini model, and also then the Indian language capabilities. So and then we've been kind of also doing a bunch of work to make these models more efficient to serve. Uh, so typically LLMs kind of do all of this generation in what is known as auto-regressive manner, right? Which is one token at a time. You can roughly think of it as one word at a time. And that part is quite slow. So our team came up with this method called tandem transformer, where you can do that generation using a smaller model, which kind of works in tandem with a larger model, paying attention to the representation of the larger model. And then for other components in the LLMs, like the attention layer, feed forward, and softmax layer, again, our team has come up with various innovations to reduce the serving cost and latency um, for those models. And another area that I'm quite excited about is that while today, if you look at any industry player, including Google, you talk about these LLMs coming in like a fixed number of sizes. So, for instance, Google talks about Gemini in 3 sizes: Ultra, Pro, and Nano. Uh, and to us, this is analogous to the pre-cloud era, where a workload would run on a fixed number of processors or fixed set of compute resources. Uh, uh, like the power of a LLM that you deploy, if you only have 3 choices, that seems very limiting. And so our team has come up with this kind of innovation, these Matryoshka models, where when you train, let's say, this ultra model using our methodology, you have thousands of models uh, of different sizes up to that size that automatically become available. So that given kind of a particular, let's say, task, or given a query, if it's a simple query, you can choose to use a very small model. And if it's a more complex query, you can choose to use a more complex model. So we've been enabling that through these Matryoshka models. So with that, let me maybe stop here and kind of uh, take it back to you, Tarun.
That was both informative and succinct and clear. I appreciate your not partly anyway, not dumbing it down, but also covering so many important issues. And I think the linguistic issue is such a big deal for those of us who are interested in economic and social and political inclusion in so many different ways, that any attempt to resolve it is most welcome. Same thing as you know, in Google Africa is going on in other places also. Let's move to Ravi. Ravi, floor is yours for 7-ish, 8 minutes, something like that.
Sure. So just to clarify the initial comment you made, I've been working in reinforcement learning for the past almost 30 years now, not in convolutional learning. Just sitting with that. So at IIT Madras, we have started this initiative on the Center for Responsible AI. Right? So the idea here is to look at how we can build and deploy AI systems in a responsible manner, taking into account their impact on the social structure, as well as looking at how the social structure should be included in building these systems as well, particularly paying attention to how we do things in India. Multiple directions in which we are doing this research. So the first thing is looking at the fit of AI models to the existing AI models that are actually in wider deployment. So I mean, Google is at one scale of things. So there is a simpler problem that we looked at. One which is about estimating the age of the fetus, right? Looking at what's the right age of the fetus in order to determine whether there's a risk of preterm birth or not. And it turns out that almost 25% of all preterm births happen in India. I think Milind works on a slightly different aspect of this problem, but we are looking more at the age estimation from ultrasound imaging. Right? And it turns out that the models that are used in most of the ultrasound machines are built on Western population, and these are overestimate the risk of preterm birth by up to 30%. And this makes it almost impossible for you to use these for reliable indicators of how a pregnancy should be treated. So we have worked with the multiple hospitals and building models from scratch, right? That actually work with the Indian population and improve the performance to a significant extent. So that's one of the major projects that we took up. It's called Garbini. And it's a pan-India project. And right now we are looking at rolling out a country-wide validation of this project backed by the Gates Foundation. So that's one instance of where we are trying to look at how AI models would work with us, the Indian population, or work in this local context. And there are other things that we are looking at, particularly because people are so keen on deploying LLMs. So one of the things that we are looking at is how do these models, right? Even when you are fine-tuning them on Indian data, so what kind of biases that they would exhibit in the Indian context, right? So trying to study that at lower level. So we are looking at this in specific domains. So we started doing the study on legal LLMs. So LLMs trained on legal text. And it turns out that there are very interesting, biases that come up. And one thing that we what we found out was that models that are fine-tuned while training to be, low bias models tend to have very poor performance. When I'm trying, for example, we tried evaluating these models which have inherently lower bias, right? I mean, we don't have the resources to run all the full-blown models, so we are trying on these open source models. When we tried the latest version of Llama 2 on legal prediction, trying to predict what legal sections apply to a case. And it turns out that models that have very low bias also have very low performance. And models that off the bat, that without doing any further bias correction, like models that perform very well, also have significant biases. And the bias here is reflected in by changing the religion of the protagonists that were involved. Right? So you ask, hey, here is a case, and where the protagonist is say Shankar, right? And is this particular liability applied to this person? And it says no, and you change, nothing else changes about the case. You change the name to Abdul. Then it says yes. So this particular criminal section applies to this case. And so we are actually finding these kinds of biases on models that were trained on even on Indian legal setting. Right? So these are some of the things that we have been looking at and trying to rise up and coming up with ways of fixing this. So now we have a mechanism by which we can further fine-tune these open source models so that they both, either at one end it was almost bias-free, but the performance was literally random, and at the other end, the performance is very good, but it was significantly biased. And so we basically now have a way of fine-tuning either of these models. You can start with either one of these models and then come to something that is also bias-free and can learn. So this is particularly in one domain that we have tried it. Now we are looking at multiple other domains that we won't expand. And there are a whole bunch of other issues that are that need to be looked at in the Indian context. So one thing that we are looking at is notions of things like informed consent. Right. So what does it mean to have informed consent? Right. So most people in India wouldn't even understand what you are asking them permission for. So how do you what would constitute informed consent in settings like this, where people do not understand the power of the models that are being built, right? Do not understand what is it that they are signing off on, right? So how would you actually build ways in which you can interact with these people? So that's another question that we are looking at, and we've also been working on building recommendations for participatory design of AI systems. So when we talk about building an AI solution, right, it's not just a single algorithm, right? It's a whole system, and we would require to involve different stakeholders at different parts, and do we have a good understanding of that yet? And especially when you're talking about building solutions for the Indian. So that is something that we have been looking at, and we have been working with multiple civil society organizations, trying to get input from them as to what do they see as pain points, both in terms of getting the data, building the model, and deploying it, looking at the user interface and how it goes out into the field. How do you continue maintaining the system? Who decides what factors go into each? So how would you involve? How would you enable a wider dialogue? These kinds of issues. That's another issue we're looking at. And so there is this, another slightly technical thing that we are starting to look at. I mean, this is something that we have, Milind and I also have been discussing, is that a lot of people are now building solutions that are based on these large language models. So it's not just a question of like a chatbot, right? So you're actually using these large language models to feed into a larger system that you're building. And it turns out that it need not always be the case that you can easily replace the language. So have a LLM that works on Hindi as opposed to English, and then expect the downstream task to perform the same. And this kind of inherent biases, not in the societal sense of a bias, but more in the machine learning sense of a bias, that could potentially be introduced by changing languages, is something that people haven't really talked about. So I think in especially when we start thinking about building these multilingual solutions for India and for countries like India, right? So this is something that we really have to study from more of a technical standpoint, and what is really happening with it. And we are also noticing certain issues. So there was an automated translation system that was generating, captioning, closed captioning in different languages, right? So people are trying to use some of the Indian language LLMs to do that closed captioning. So if you think of a verbatim translation, it was fine. But if you think of the local kind of lingo, right? The local spin that people would have, right? The colloquial way of speaking that. The translations were very off color. So literally the meaning was right, but the native speaker who hears this is going to think, oh my God, okay, I wouldn't say that in decent company. And this we don't, in India, we don't even have a formalization of these kinds of representations. What does it, so what is the right way to refer to a person of color? And there's a lot of understanding about that in the US context. But in Indian context, we still don't have something that's written down. That's not formalized. It's not even easy for us to build guardrails when you're talking about systems like that. So how would you do this? And it's not just a purely a technical solution. We also have to worry about where we, how do we get the data itself? And I'll come back to more points on more questions. So we can move on to Milind.
Let me interrupt for a second. That's a very nice overview of specific problems that you are working on, whether it's dealing with the ambient lack of literacy and understanding of how to engage with the models, or its different sources of either, as you put it, societal or algorithmic bias. Can you say a little bit word about Milind was telling me that you are participating in some policy role or advisory policy role. Can you say just like 2 minutes of where that stands in your understanding of the development of AI?
Yeah, so the Indian government is actually trying to really understand the whole landscape, right? So they're trying out multiple initiatives. They've constituted a couple of advisory bodies in which the industries are participating, and then they've also tried to get more engagement with the academy. So right now, I'm kind of chairing a subcommittee for the government where we are trying to get inputs from multiple departmental stakeholders from the government. So trying to look at where they see AI is going to impact operations in there, which also like Department of Agriculture, healthcare, the information technology, and so on and so forth. Right? So we're trying to get input from the various sectors in terms of where do they see AI is impacting them, and then we are giving guidelines as to how we should frame regulations in the Digital India Act. So that's something that we're looking at. So the strong recommendation is to have this kind of an interministerial coordination body continue to exist, right? Not just do these discussions and go away. This kind of a body should continue to exist and help the government monitor AI deployment and also involve much of the industry in more self-regulation. That's the
Thank you for those comments. Let's hear from Milind for 6 minutes or so, and then I'll ask a few general questions, and then we'll open it up.
Yeah, so I wanted to give a quick overview of the field of AI for social good, beginning with how it developed in the US and then its implications in India. So people were engaged in applying AI for societal problems. For example, we were at, before 2016 or so, working with homeless people in Los Angeles and using AI for reducing HIV risk behaviors and so forth. But really the catalyst for making AI for social good as a field was the Obama White House workshop. They held a workshop in 2016. They got some of us together and asked us to organize this workshop. It was heavily publicized. They actually held a series of workshops, AI safety, AI and jobs. One of them was AI for social good. And I submitted that workshop was the catalyst by which suddenly this AI for social good became known as a field. A lot of universities starting centers for AI for social good. I was at the time at University of Southern California. We wanted to have a center on AI for social good, and our colleagues at the time were upset with us that, what are you saying? I'm doing AI for social bad and you're doing AI for social good. So this name of the center is not acceptable. So we changed the name of the Center for AI and Society to make it milder and so forth. But in India, Wadhwani AI established a center on AI for social good in 2018, February. And Prime Minister Modi came and inaugurated the center. And they were proudly just going after AI for social good more broadly. Following that, in India, of course, different labs were pursuing this. I was fortunate enough to participate in the AI for social good efforts at Google Research India as part of that effort. So that's kind of the overall sense of AI for social good. Now it is well recognized as a whole field. It's sort of developing its own possible textbooks and things of that nature. I wanted to, though, not keep it at a very high level and drill down into some specifics. So the kinds of challenges that are of interest are, of course, public health, conservation, education, agriculture. There's just a whole host of challenges where, when we talk about AI for social good, these challenges arise. I wanted to first talk about some work that we have done in India for maternal and child health and draw lessons from that. So in summer of 2019, I met with Aparna Hegde, who's the founder of Lemann, which is a maternal and child health organization in India. And it seemed like there's just so much of an opportunity to work with their organization for applying AI towards maternal and child health. Concrete example that they provided was their mobile health program. So exploiting the fact that cell phones are very widely available, they had started this program in 2013, where essentially every week they will, for mothers who register and expecting or new mothers who register in the program, from the time they register to the baby being 1 year old, they provide an automated 2-minute health message to the mother. It could be take more iron, take calcium supplements, get the baby vaccinated. So every week, 2-minute automated health message. In randomized control trials, they show that mothers who listen to these messages compared to those who don't benefit significantly for their own health and their baby's health. Unfortunately, and this is where we came in, they observed that 30 to 40% of the mothers who register in the program drop out of the program. They have in their program 200,000 mothers registered at a time, but they can only intervene on 1,000 of these mothers per week. And by the point of the intervention essentially is to persuade these mothers to not drop out of the program. And so this could be via live service call or a home visit or what have you. So the question is which 1,000 out of the 200,000 to select every week in order to visit. Doing a random intervention doesn't work as well. We've shown this through our own field experiments. So AI can assist in figuring out, in ranking, who are the top 1,000 mothers to intervene on that would benefit the most from the intervention at this time. So we built such a model. We were able to show via field trials that it is far more effective, cuts the dropout rate by 30%. And the model is deployed. It has since 2022, it has benefited about 350,000 mothers so far who have gone through the program. Key lessons that I take away from this is that for these kinds of AI for social good challenges, applications to be successful, we need a partner organization and deep partnerships who have the data, who can do when we develop an AI model, are willing to do field experiments with that model. When the field experiments are successful, can actually deploy the model and scale it up. And so if such partner organizations are available, then we can actually apply AI for social good. I've also had experiences with other organizations in India who have equally important causes, but either don't have the data or just not the capability to deploy these systems and things of that nature. So I was very happy to see that Lemann is one organization that is, really has the ability to scale things up. They are now working with a national program called Kilkari for maternal and child health. This is a government of India program, where 3 million mothers registered at a time. So this gives the capability potentially to us to work with this program to impact mothers at a much larger scale. And that's what we are trying to pursue. But there are many organizations in India who have these sorts of data. We've held workshops at Google trying to match professors with these organizations who have a lot of data, who have the willingness to try out AI solutions. They have mobile health programs, for example, or conservation causes that they are administering, or agricultural challenges that they're addressing, where AI for social good could actually be very impactful. And we've been trying to do this matchmaking and try and see these kinds of organizations applying AI to their different problems, and have, through matchmaking, have seen a number of these projects begin to take place. So this has been very hopeful in terms of seeing AI being of assistance for social impact on a large scale.
Great. Thank you, Milind, and thank you to all the panelists. Maybe we could bring them back on the screen so I can see them. Thank you. So I had a question for any of the panelists. There's been an explosion in, I would say, formalization of data collection or society's ability to engage with data in India with the digital public goods that have been rolled out, starting with Aadhaar, which is the biometric ID for those of you in the room who are unfamiliar, the UPI, the United Payments Interface, which has made payment exchange near seamless, near zero cost, asymptotically near zero cost, and so many more. The vaccine platform, blah, blah, blah. Can any of you, starting with Manish and then Ravi, comment on how we think about the interface between those oceans of data and the different models that you're talking about, or any of your efforts? And I'm thinking of all sorts of so many issues: granularity, privacy, aggregation. There's any number of conceptual issues that come to mind immediately. But and any comments there, just to connect to that ambient issue that is salient in people's minds?
Yeah, maybe I can start, and then Ravi, you should comment. So you're very right, Tarun. I mean, this has been like a very, very transformative kind of an initiative, right, from organization like iSpirit and this whole volunteers who have been putting together this Aadhaar stack. What they have done is really start to put this digital kind of backbone where so many of these, let's say, mobile, all these payments, right, which used to happen previously by cash or through very, very cumbersome mechanisms, they kind of, in some sense, establish these open APIs, which the government pretty much established these as standards, kind of push the banks to adopt those APIs and start opening up, right, this things like peer-to-peer transfer and so on, pretty much at a essentially very, very low cost. In fact, for the consumer, it's pretty much for free. So I think it has definitely led to this whole revolution. However, all of this data, right, for good reasons, it is not available today, right, to any kind of, I mean, you can't just go and say mine all of this UPI transactions data, because this is, again, very, very sensitive data. So I think there needs to be this additional work that has to be done on how do you start to kind of apply these privacy preserving methods, start to kind of provide the appropriate protections, right, to consumers, so that the data is not shared without their consent, and even kind of in most cases, right, you do not want any personally identifiable information, right, to be associated with some of this data. And in fact, as you get to financial transactions, as you get to health data and so on, these become extremely sensitive. So I think there is kind of that need to address some of these privacy concerns upfront in the design. But once you do that, I think there's enormous potential to start to utilize this data again for public good. So maybe, and I know, Ravi, you have been thinking a lot about these. You've been also working with some of these like digital commons and kind of data commons initiative, as well as the open data initiative. So perhaps you can comment further on this.
Sure. So I mean, I want to echo what Manish was saying, right? It's been pretty transformative. And I jokingly say that, when Indians come to the US, then when people show us the Statue of Liberty and the Niagara Falls and things like that. And then when people from US come to India, we show them UPI, right? So that's how transformative it has been. Right? So, but having said that, so there's a lot of, push from the government to enable AI developers and AI researchers to use this vast amounts of data that's being gathered, right? So it's part of the India AI initiative, right? So the government, one of the things that the government is trying to do is set up a huge kind of a data platform where a lot of these data is going to be available in a slightly regulated manner. They want to make sure, especially sensitive data doesn't leave India's shores. So they want to make sure they control who gets to access the data and so on and so forth. Potentially academics and maybe some startups that go through some kind of a filtering process. But there is a significant push from the government, and there's at least the outgoing government was very, very, very gung-ho about this in terms of using this rich data sources to improve efficiency and transparency in provision of public service. Right? So that is something that the government is very much interested in investing in. So the other initiatives, there were a couple of, there was this open government data, the open data initiative that I think started in the UK, which the government tried to follow through on. So there's a portal called data.gov.in, where a lot of the public data is available now. Right? It started out as a very bad interface that was just playing lip service, but now it's become much, much better in terms of the data that's accessible to the portal. But certainly it doesn't still touch the EPI transactional data and so on and so forth. It's more on the the digitized data from various government departments that are being made available.
Okay, thank
We
you.
have
Thank
quite
you,
some
Ravi.
ways to go.
Thank you. Thank you. I apologize for interrupting, but I want to just
That's
use
fine. Yeah.
5-6
Yeah.
minutes to just maybe gather a few comments or questions. I'm not sure we have time to address them, but let us at least hear what's on people's minds, and then we'll figure out how to get responses from the panelists ex post, if you will. And Milind would be happy to be troubled in person since he's local. Can you just raise your hand when we go to our student at the back? Yeah. Just introduce yourself very briefly and keep the questions sharp and brief.
Thanks for being here. My name is Ayushi. I'm actually working with Professor Khanna in the business school. My background is machine learning at Princeton. My question for you is, you all represent these amazing institutions. Where do you see the role of startups to be, given that today data is so important for AI, as is sort of like regulatory connective tissue? So where do you think startups can actually make a difference with AI in India?
Okay, so we'll just take a few questions and then we can go. Colleague here, Archon. Yeah.
So I was interested, we've all heard about the India stack, of
Who are
course.
you?
Sorry, my name's Archon Basu. I'm an alum of the college. We've all heard about the India stack, of course, and you mentioned, Ravi, that this could be a model for other countries. Would love to hear comments about how that is going, which other countries have adopted it. We're probably ready for an America stack, for example.
Good luck. Sheila, right here next to you.
Hi, I'm Sheila Jasanoff. I'm a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. So it's interesting to hear all of you talk about how it's important to involve the civil society in the design. But of course, the design has already progressed to an enormous extent. I mean, these systems are already in place. So I'm just wondering to what extent design choices have already been made that you're prepared to open up, and in what ways you're going about soliciting this kind of input on fairly important upstream matters.
Manish, Ravi, do you want to pick maybe one of those? I'll just itemize them. Question about the role of startups.
Sure.
Question about whether you see India stack applying outside, for instance, to the US, since Archon is sitting in the US. And the third is Sheila's, which is the design basically frozen by this point, vis-a-vis how society interacts with these emergent models and infrastructures and so on. So let me start with Milind first. Any of these issues? You don't have to answer all, just any.
No, just very quickly, Sheila, your question is extremely important, which is making sure that as we engage with these partners that we offer them that it's a true partnership that is built from the ground up, and certainly not a situation where we say, okay, here's a design, here's a solution, and we are going to apply it to your case no matter what. And particularly because the reward system in AI research in particular is set up in a way where technological brilliance is valued over actual use. There is a real danger that people want to show off how brilliant their solution is as opposed to actually demonstrating its actual utility for the partner in the field. And so we have to be very, very guarded. Your caution is very well taken, and we certainly take it to heart to make sure that we start from the problem first, partnership-centered approach. But it's something it's a more systemic problem, I feel, at least from a research perspective, where unless the system is altered in some way to change the reward system, we run into the danger that you're pointing out.
Yeah, but with respect, Milind, you didn't answer the question. You said you basically made an aspirational statement about what we would like to see, which of course we all agree with, and then talked about the incentives of academics. I think the question still stands: to what extent is it architecturally frozen versus amenable to collective adjudication, either by well-meaning educated people or by political societal pressure, what have you? Let me cold call Manish. What's your view on this?
Oh, I wanted to chime in.
Ravi, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Because it's something that we have been thinking about. So the point is that the AI piece, right, is only a small fraction of a very large system that we have into place. So that might be from the, both from the academic viewpoint and also from the industrial development that has happened. It is the AI piece that has seen a lot of the choices that have been made and locked in. But the overall system, the flow, right, is still very much application driven. And there is a lot of input that can still come in from the stakeholders when you're building the whole system around it. That's partly what Milind was alluding to as well. So when we're building the system and we're talking to Atman, even though the core AI algorithm is not something they're going to give a lot of input on, right? But they can tell us about how the system should be organized, what are the factors we should be paying attention to, and how should the output be delivered, and what would be the most effective way of delivering the output and so on. So still a lot of input that we get from the system.
Great. Okay. I'm going to use the prerogative of the chair and bring the panel to a close. If Salman and company can figure out a way to get responses to the other couple of questions, that would be nice. We are 10 minutes behind because we started 10 minutes late, with apologies to David and Priya and Chandru. We will take 10 minutes and we're going right into it. Okay, so we're going right into it. But thank you to the panelists. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.